name's George. I identify as an alcoholic, but my my uh, my history is most definitely not limited to alcohol. In the rooms at AA, I only talk about alcohol, but to me, booze, pills, and powders are all the exact same thing, and I'll talk about that a little bit. So I think we did talk, Mike and I, a lot because I was really hesitant. I wasn't hesitant, but I didn't really know what this was like, and I love laughing, and I find in sobriety and being clean that I laugh at a lot of shit. I really do. And a lot of the really horrible stuff that happened to me, I can laugh at it now. But I take my recovery really, really seriously. It's the most important thing in my life. It absolutely is. And it's probably the most important thing in my family's life too. But that's another story. So, yeah, like anything I put in my body to change the way I feel, I'm easily addicted to. And if I haven't been addicted to it in the past and I put it in my body to change the way I feel, odds are I'm going to be addicted to it pretty soon. Anything. But luckily, a lot of stuff interrupted me. And I'm really psyched to be here because I'm kind of like a recent arrival to Dopey. And the way I found it, I think, was really, really magic. The first time I put down narcotics and alcohol was in December of 2003. And to give you an idea of how long I ran with narcotics and alcohol, I estimate, because I don't remember, I first picked up drugs and alcohol around 1971 when I was about 11. May have been, and I picked up alcohol a little bit earlier. So that makes me kind of an old head. And if it wasn't for a relapse last year, I'd have put together a lot of sober years free of both. Not all in the program, but free of alcohol and drugs. I came back into recovery after a relapse that was pretty short but pretty horrible, and I haven't looked back since. So how did I find Dopey? In 2003, I was very unwillingly sent to some place in New Jersey called Alina Lodge, and I was there for 11 months, and it's a hardcore AA-focused 12-step rehab that is a compassionate, well, it's an empathetic place. I don't know if it's anyway, it's a tough place to be. And there's a lot of funny stories I could tell about it. But I was Googling the place after I came back into the room just to kind of see who was still there and everything. And I came across Dopey because Chris and Dave on some old I think it was like a single digit one of their podcasts, like number 3 or 5 or something like that. They were talking about it. One of them had been there. I forgot which one. I think it was Chris. So I like saying toodles to Chris because I don't know many people who've been to that place. But they talked about it and how whacked out it was. And then they were talking about the expression that I understand goes around rehab circles, which is whatever you do, whatever you've done, dodge the lodge. Don't go to Alina Lodge. It is too hardcore and you'll be there. There's no, like I hear the Dopey advert about these places in California with like ponies and hot tubs and sweat lodges. And that's nice. I mean, that could work, but Alina Lodge, you didn't have any of that. You had like a cell, a cot. It wasn't a cell, but it was like a little bare room, a cot, and no TV, no newspapers, no looking, or even, you couldn't even make eye contact with the females there for more than 3 seconds, or they would increase your time in rehab. And the average stay, I think, was about 10 months. And you didn't want to be there longer than that. Anyway, but I'll get to that and maybe when I get to what worked. I have a lot of love and respect for the place, but I fucking hated it when I was there. But I've been back 5 times to talk there, actually. So anyway, I didn't dodge the lodge. I'm really grateful for that. And so here, I guess I'll tell you my story. I was born in New York City in 1960 to a really nice middle-class family. I had a lot of trauma in my childhood, which, a lot of people do, but it gave me some of the coping mechanisms that I think are really kind of good for addicts. They're kind of like precursors, I think, to like addiction. And it also gave me a pretty good excuse for a lot of the behavior that I had, so it definitely gave me the means. The trauma gave me the means, and I'll explain how, to get high from like really young. My mother died when I was 3. She got really sick with cancer when I was 2. She was really young. She was only 31 when she got diagnosed. And I was 3 when she died. And that's sad, I know that. But a lot of people have gone through trauma and they don't become drug addicts and alcoholics. But some of the behaviors in my early childhood were like really conducive to that. There's no other, not that I know of, but there's no other alcoholics in my family, and there aren't. I don't think there are many drug addicts. I mean, my stepmother was one for a while, and that's part of my story. But I didn't. We weren't ever allowed to speak of her. So after she died, I mean, I know my dad was flipped out by it because they had met in high school in Brooklyn at James Madison High, and they were really close. And when she died, it blew him away. But we were never, ever, ever, ever allowed to talk about her. And as I grew up, we still weren't. So I thought it was something to be embarrassed about. I thought I was different. I was ashamed. I was angry. And then my dad, to make everything better, remarried like 5 months after she died just to get us an instant mom, me and my sister. And I had real problems with my stepmom. I don't now, but she's part of my recovery. But that was my earliest lesson in how to change or pretend to change the way I feel to make sure I didn't get hassled in my life. Because my dad was just a poor kid from Brooklyn, and he had a temper. You know, he was a loving guy, but he could also hit. So I didn't talk about stuff, and that was the way we were encouraged to be. If you pretended everything was okay on the outside, no matter what was going on, everything was all right, and that's what we did. So I've heard that a lot from people in the rooms. But I learned how to, change the way I feel to make sure I got no hassle. Another thing is that my dad, for some reason I'll never fathom, never threw away her massively copious supply of every form of painkiller, sedative, and sleeping pill prescribed in 1960s America. So, and this also coincided growing up with a really stupid approach to drug education in the New York public schools. So I got an education in drugs and a supply of drugs at the same time, and probably when I needed it the most, which was in prepubescence and early adolescence. So I'll tell you about the drug. This is funny, and I try to find humor in this stuff, and this I think is funny. But if you guys don't laugh, I won't take it personally. And if any of you went to New York public schools in the 70s or 60s, you'll probably get with this. So first off, the page 64, I don't remember pages of the big book, but I remember page 64 of our health education book in 6th grade, because that was the page about drugs. And it gave you like no pictures, but it had all the drugs listed, all the slang names for them, and all the effects of them. And then it didn't have any pictures, but it was like a 6th grade physician's desk reference in my mind. I was like, ooh, that's in my mom. That's in that box of drugs. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And I bet a lot of kids didn't pick up on that. But I read page 64 more times than I read anything else. And I love reading. I read a lot. But back then I was like, I can still remember what it looked like. And I'm old. I'm 60 years old, so I don't remember everything. Then there was this assembly we had about drug education, also in 6th grade. And so you had a bunch of unruly kids, half of whom were from the projects, the other half were like suburban kids, and then, or like nice neighborhood kids. And then we had to watch a Dragnet episode with that cop, Jack Webb, that Joe Friday guy. That was maybe his partner. I don't remember, but it was Dragnet. And in it, they were hassling all these hippies that were taking drugs. And me and my friends were rooting for the hippies, so and the druggies. So they all had. The reason for that was they all had long hair. They said like groovy and far out men. And the main character, I remember this really well. He had this awesome girlfriend with long blonde hair and tinted sunglasses. And I don't think anybody in here is as old as I am. But if you want to check on my age, I remember that she looked like Julie from the Mod Squad. There was a TV show in the 60s called the Mod Squad, and these cool cops. So Margaret's nodding her head. She remembers that. Well, Julie was kind of hot, so I thought that was great. Meanwhile, the cops were kind of like assholes, like Jack Webb. He was like my principal at school, and parents and other old people who push you around and tell you what to do. So I was sitting there rooting for the druggies. And then about a week later, we had another assembly, and the police brought in this guy, poor guy. He was like he had like a black leather jacket and blue jeans. I remember him. He was a white guy with like an afro, like a Jufro, and he had an attitude that was like, well, anyway, it was obvious that he had been arrested for drugs, for either using or dealing. And now he was up there doing his community service, and he had to talk to kids. He looked like this white Black Panther guy with a smirk on his face. And he was telling us with this like smirk on his face, no, kids, don't do drugs. You don't want to end up like me. And we were like, yeah, we want to end up like you. Or at least I was. I was like, yeah, you look cool. And the cops don't like you. And I thought that was funny. But seriously, I was predisposed to be getting high because a couple of years before that, and you won't believe this, but it's true. There was this craze in my school where you would stand up and hyperventilate, and your friend would come up behind you and wrap his arms around you really tight and kind of like crush you, and then let you go, and you'd stumble around like in a state of semi-asphyxiation, all buzzing out of your head. And I loved it, man. I was doing it all the time. Drugs. I didn't start off slow, since I had all those drugs from my mom around, and I found them because kids go through their parents' drawers, and I think it was in the closet. But the first drug I took was Demerol, which is like a very strong opiate. Like it's like legal heroin, really. Demerol. It was called meperidine. I remember that, and I won't go into naming drugs, but my dad had kept two. Each pill was individually wrapped in foil, and it was rolled. And he had like 3 rolls that were the size of like softballs. So there was like tons of them. And I took one, and I took a couple actually, and I loved it. I loved everything about how it made me feel. It didn't make me sick. It just made me feel great. And I chased it for two-thirds of my life. And I loved it so much that a couple of years later, when I ran out, I was on a school bus and I thought I had the flu. And I had no idea that I was dope sick, and I was probably 13 or 14. I don't remember. But anyway, I was a rebellious kid. I was an angry kid. I was a vandal. I did all this acting out, and I learned this in rehab by talking to another guy, that another high that I got addicted, another thing I got addicted to is running and laughing. Like if I could be running from the police or from school or from some other kids, and I'd be laughing my head off. I felt free. You know, I loved that adrenaline buzz. So I was brave. I was just a rebellious kid, like a lot of us are. I stole a car when I was like my first car when I was like 13. I didn't know how to drive, and I crashed it into a police athletic league softball game. And I remember being chased by like 10 cops with baseball bats, and I was laughing my ass off. And I got away with it. I got away. I was fast, so I got away. But I was laughing. You know? They would have beaten me to, I don't know what they would. Well, I was young. Maybe they wouldn't have too much, but they had baseball bats and they were chasing me. So the message was pretty clear. Yeah. So that kind of stuff took me out of my world. I was an unhappy kid. I had a lot of issues. You know, I think now if I was like that, they would have diagnosed me with having ADHD or something. But they didn't do that back then. So you know how it goes. So another thing that I'm not going to spend like all day on my childhood, but another thing that strikes me that was also about kind of alcoholic and addict behavior was that we moved to Boston when I was a teenager, and when I was in junior high school in New York, and we moved to Boston. And I remember to drive up there in Connecticut on I-95. I remember really distinctly thinking that when I get to Boston, nobody knows who I am. I can pretend to be anybody I want to be. I can hang out with the people I want to hang out with. Nobody has to know about what I'm really like, and I can just have a great time. And that's not really normal thinking, I don't think. Another thing was that I hated leaving New York. I still love New York. It's still my hometown. I lived there, fortunately, later on in my life, but I loved it, you know. My grandmothers, one was in Brooklyn and one was in Queens, and I spent a lot of my childhood with them because my house was kind of messed up. So I left the place that I really loved to go to some place I didn't want to go to. But that's life, you know. I was going to be someone else. So I wasn't stupid. I was a really bad student. But if I liked something, I was good at it and I would pay attention to it. And if I was bored with it, like math or something, I just didn't go. I'd rather have been getting high. And that's a funny thing about in Boston. Well, I'll tell you first, I'll tell you about my first drink. As I talk about this in AA, I was probably younger than 11. I might have been about 10. And me and my friend Richie, it went to his parents. This is still in New York. We were in his parents' basement at the bar. And we mixed up like all the alcohol in the 2 glasses. He drank his, threw up, started crying, and ran upstairs. And I drank mine, threw up, and had another one. So that was kind of like I was cut out for this. As soon as I got to Boston, the older kids that I was in school with, their brothers, a lot of the brothers were dealers. That's like dabbling in dealers, like selling weed and stuff like that. And my best friend Skippy, G, I won't say his name. His dad was a cop, and for some reason I never figured out, but I think I know why now. I have a hypothesis about it anyway. He always had drugs, and I always had drugs for my stash from my mom. But nobody checked that stash. It was just in the back of a closet somewhere. So we would, and he always had drugs. His dad probably took them off of people like me. And we would meet up in the early morning in the bathroom at school with those little secrets canisters, and we'd open them up and we'd have them full of pills and a couple of joints and stuff like that. And by 8 o'clock in the morning, we were high in the classroom. So we'd, eat them and then we'd go to class. So with vandalism, with all that stuff, disappointment of my father, everybody angry at me all the time. Finally, I got in Boston at this point. I got kicked out at about, I think I was 16. I might have just turned 17. And I always didn't mind because I was working. I always worked. I was making pizzas in a pizzeria, and which is where you'd make pizzas, right? And I had that thing that so many kids do. I had my parents, the one night they had to trust me to go to a funeral back in New York. They took my baby sister. My older sister didn't live there. She stayed in New York, went to Barnard College. And I threw the biggest party that my neighborhood had ever seen. And it was like it wasn't the thing that did it, but it was the icing on the cake because nobody in my family drank except me. When my folks came back, I was crashed out in their bed with my girlfriend, and the garbage cans and all the garbage bags were stacked with alcohol bottles. And I couldn't really say, I don't know how that happened. So my dad got pissed off. He gave me $50 and he threw me out of the house. And I was like, all right, I'm free. $50 for throwing a party, man. It doesn't get much better than that. And I had a job. After school, I was making like $100 a week, which back then was not bad for a 17-year-old. And so this is kind of funny, I think. I crashed a couple of nights at a friend's house, and then I got paid, and I found this women's junior college in Boston in Kenmore Square was going out of business. They were going bankrupt, and they were renting out rooms in the dormitories for $50 a week. So I rented one, and it just so happened to be, I don't know if anybody here is from Boston or knows Boston, but it happened to be 3 stories above and half a block down from this awesome nightclub, this punk club called the Rat Skeller. Anybody from Boston? I don't know, but it was great. It was like one of those early CBGB mud club type places. It was awesome. So I'm underage. I'm in high school. I got a job, and I'm hanging out in this bar that didn't care if you were 5. You could have drank in the Rat. They just would give you a beer can in a paper bag and say, "Don't drink it near the window or the door." And then I heard like great bands. It was 1977, and it was a really good time to be young and irresponsible, I think. So and all I wanted to do was get high, have a rock and roll lifestyle. All that kind of stuff. I played pinball with Joey Ramone. I remember that, and some other stuff. And it was really fun. There was no consequences yet, except that I was like fucking up my life, but I didn't know that. I wasn't stupid. I managed to get out, finish high school, and and in my family, the tradition was you finish high school, you go to uni or college, they call it in America. So my only criteria for getting into college was that they had to accept bad grades, but decent SATs. And it had to be as far away from my family as possible, but it had to be on the East Coast. That was my selection criteria. So I ended up in Philadelphia, at Temple University, with no intention whatsoever of getting an education, but it meant that I could have like a little bit of like a place to go. And it was a cool city. And I could have an apartment and a meal plan and pretend everything was okay on the outside for my parents. But for me, it was wild. I just ran wild. I got a job right away at night in restaurants. My whole life was like sleeping in, working in a restaurant, going to after hours clubs and partying all the time. That's all, grades were incidental. Attendance at class was like non-existent. I didn't really care. I went on like what was called a 5-year plan. It took me 5 years to kind of squeak out the bare modicum of a degree. But it was certainly nothing that wasn't an academic career. And all this time I was getting in massive trouble. So I was running wild in the clubs, the Hot Club, the East Side Club, I don't know if anybody's from Philly, but these were all like cool places back then. And I loved it, when you're cooking in a restaurant, you have Monday nights off, and there's all these after hours clubs where hard drinking people go and hang out and get high, and I loved it. I got arrested for the second time around then, which is kind of a funny story too, because it's kind of a rock and roll type of story, and it describes a fight that I got into. I was going to see the Clash in 1978 at University City in Philly, and I lit a cigarette on the subway, and I was smoking a cigarette on the subway, looking all, thinking I was badass, and I got arrested, and I got taken into the station, and they finally let me go, but it was late, and they gave me this citation, and I popped it in my pocket, and I ran to the gig. I got to the gig, and it was just about over, but I got in, and back then they weren't that well known, so you could hang out afterwards backstage, and we did that, and then we went off to this nightclub, the East Side Club, which I was a regular at, and I got in a fight with a DJ there because he was sucking up to my hero Joe Strummer, and me and my friends used to say to him, we used to call him up. This DJ Pierre Robert was his name in Philadelphia. He was like this hippie with really long hair. We used to call him up and say, "Mother," we used to say, yeah, we used to call him something, and then we'd call him up and we'd be like, "We know where you park your car. We're going to set it on fire tonight if you don't play the Dead Boys," stuff like that. And it was just for shits and giggles, you know. So he was there. He was kissing ass to my like this guy who I still think is wonderful, and I'm really sad he's dead, Joe Strummer. And I went up and I like shoved him, and I said, "You motherfucker! You don't even play their music and this and that." And Strummer put his arm around me and he was like, "It's all right, mate. It's my job, but let's go get drunk." And we sat at the bar and we drank Heinekens all night. And it was like one of the, like, for a guy who was my age, like 18, it was like, hell, it was the greatest. My girlfriend wanted to go home, I remember, and I was like, I'm not, fuck off, I'm not going home. Anyway, that was a funny story. And it was really, back then it was still fun, you know, it was really still fun. But this is the point where it began to turn. I got married really young at 24 to a woman that her mother was an alcoholic. She was British. She was from the city I live in now, actually. And she was traveling around the States. And she was working well, my kids probably won't hear this. They might. She was just working in like an after hours club, a club of some ill repute kind of club. That was a bad place. And I was just, but I remember this is like, here's the rationale for getting married at 24. She bought me a blanket and a pillow for my apartment, and nobody had ever done anything like that for me before. So I was like, oh, she's going to take care of me. And she was attractive and had an accent, which now I don't even hear anymore because I live here. But I was like, cool, that was good enough. And I thought, finally, I found a woman in my life to take care of me. We were married for 26 years. But that marriage didn't survive my sobriety. You know, I guess maybe if I have time, I'll get to that bit. So I'll fast forward this. We had 2 kids. I got a job. I used to fuck up upward. You know, that's like the funny thing about this. I would fuck up upward. Like nobody ever had a party for me when I left the job. They had a party after I left the job, but they didn't have it when I was in the job. And I ended up working for a Wall Street firm in Philadelphia as a trader. And the only thing I was taught the job, I started as a clerk, and then some people taught me the job. And the thing I liked about it was that it was undisciplined and it rewards all the wrong behaviors. So I was really into it. And it was competitive, and I like competition. And it gave me like some rewards financially. And I was failing up. I'd get fired, or I'd have a blowout with somebody, and some other firm would take me on. And it was all right. But I had a lot of misadventures. I ended up spending nights in the Roundhouse in Philly, which is the jailhouse. It's not a nice place to be. You don't want to be there. And here's a war story that, yeah, was he alive? You guys say something about Toodles to somebody named Todd. I don't know who Todd is. My best friend's name was Todd, and Todd died around this time. And he was really my best friend. I have really good friends now, but I've never had a friend like Todd again. We did everything together. He was like my brother. I didn't have any brothers. And he died. And this is, you know, I don't know if it was alcohol related, but I think it's probable because he drank like me and he used like me. And he fell off a 13-story building in Florence, Italy, just doing risk, you know, either high, drunk, or risk-taking behavior, you know. So I always wanted to say for this tonight, Toodles to Todd, because I love that guy. I think about him every day. He was really talented and he was a great friend, and I really miss him. My ex-wife wouldn't let me name my son Todd. She didn't like him, but I liked him. And so up there, Todd, introduce yourself to Chris. But yeah. And about this time, so the war story, like, it's a funny one. I know Mac likes this story. Before I even started in the city, like in Wall Street, my first job out of uni was running a lobster wholesaler. I ran a lobster business. And the luck, the way it went, was like one of the biggest drug dealers in Philly, this guy named Norman. He lived down on 3rd and Kristen Street in Philly. And he was a dealer who would trade drugs for lobsters. Figure that out, right? So I would steal a few lobsters from the place, get in a taxi cab, go to Norman's house at 3rd Street, and I'd walk in. He'd be like, "Oh, lobsters, what do you want?" And I'd tell him what I wanted. He had everything, and I'd leave with pocketfuls of drugs and get back in the cab and go back to work. So I didn't have to spend my own money. So I was stealing these things. But anyway, the funny thing about the story is about the last time, one of the last times I went to him, he was doing what drug dealers do, which is I got to the apartment, he was watching porn and getting high. And he was like, "Oh, just put them in the refrigerator." So I went to put these nice, beautiful lobsters in the refrigerator. I opened up the refrigerator and it almost knocked me down because it stunk. There were like 35 dead lobsters in the refrigerator. He liked to trade for them, but apparently didn't like to eat them. And I didn't say that. I was just like, "Okay, man," I put them in the, I consigned those lobsters to die with their brothers in that refrigerator, got my drugs and left. So that's the, it's just mad what we do, man. I don't know how this stuff happens. But then things began to get bad for me. This now going forward in time, I'm working in the city. I'm working for a really good firm, have a house. And one night I'm drinking in a neighborhood in Philly called Manayunk, which is a Lenni Lenape Indian word, ironically, for where we go to drink. It's like right on the river. So I'm sure that's what the Lenni Lenape Indians, that's why they named it that. But it was like a mill town, and it became like a cool place to hang out. So I'm in like rental car. Okay, how can I describe this? I had crashed my car. I had crashed a rental car, probably another rental car. So I'm on rental car 3 with 2 other rental cars and my car in the shop. And I'm bombed out of my head on my combination of drugs and alcohol. And I'm driving through the ghetto to get home. And it's probably about 4 in the morning. And I vaguely remember somebody walking out between 2 cars onto the street. I was probably going about 30, and I turned the wheel really fast, and the car flipped over. And I remember the sparks as it was on the roof, and I think it ran into the gutter. And I'm lying there, and I bit my tongue in half, and I'm bleeding. The blood's pooling. I'm upside down, and the blood's pooling on the roof of the car. And some guys come over to the car, and I'm like, "Help me, help me!" And they put a knife to my throat and fucking robbed me. And I remember thinking, like, "Okay, well, this shit happens." I got to the hospital. It was like another day. It was like another, that's what blows my mind about it now. It was like, that's not normal. It doesn't happen to everybody. And to me, it was like, I got taken to the hospital somehow. I don't know how. And I learned that, first of all, I learned something I didn't know, that there's a special surgical tool that will hold your tongue and pull it out of your head while they suture it. And then I thought I better leave because I don't want to get arrested. So I was totally wasted. And I walked home, and I woke up stuck to all my sheets with blood. And all I did was use that as an excuse to call my doctor and get more drugs for pain. Oh, I got in an accident, my tongue hurts, that kind of stuff. And it was just like, it didn't stop me. That wasn't even close to when I stopped. Anyway, the kind of last big war story, and it's not a war story, it's just what happened and what got me kind of close to AA. Let me just check I'm timing myself because I don't want to go over, right? Well, you'll tell me, right? Mike, you'll tell me. Just put your thumb up. Okay. So my ex-wife used to go back to England 3 or 4 times a year to visit her family, and I wouldn't go because I was working. And that was the times that I really ran wild. So I was in Atlantic City gambling and drinking. And it was one of those times where no matter how much I drank, I couldn't get drunk. And no matter how many Valium I took, I couldn't get high. And at 4 in the morning, I went, and I want to say this. This is, I think, important. I had standards back then. I would not gamble in a Trump-affiliated casino. I only went to Claridge's. So, and I did. I went to Claridge's, and I slept in the car park in my car for about 3 hours. Then I got on the Atlantic City Expressway to drive back to Philly. And by the grace of God, going through the Egg Harbor toll, it was one of those transponder tolls where you had to slow down so it could read your transponder. And so I must have been going 10. And I fell asleep right as I was going through the toll booth. And the car swerved off the road, and I smashed into a parked car where people were in it on the side of the highway. And my first instinct was to turn the wheel really fast. I should have learned, but I hadn't, and floor it and get away. But then the left tire fell off. It was an Audi. The left tire fell off. And I'm in the middle of the highway, revving my engine, drunk out of my mind, with 3 tires not going anywhere. And I thought to myself, okay, life as I know it is now fucking over. I'm dead. There was nowhere for me to go. I got arrested, and then that began this like really bad set of events. Uh, I think the only funny thing about it was I fought it. I felt sorry for myself. I fought it with the charges, with every resource I had. The charges were serious, but if you get injured under the influence or you injure somebody else in a vehicle, it's like a felony assault. So that meant I also couldn't work on Wall Street anymore. So I fought it for as long as I could, because you can't trade if you have a felony assault and or a felony. And I fought it for like a year in court, and to the point where my lawyer was pissed off at me, the judge hated me, the DA wanted my ass. They weren't giving me any breaks. And finally, I had a moment of clarity. I'm sitting in the court, almost bankrupt. My wife's ready to leave me. Can't blame her. And I lost my job because I had a felony. And it occurred to me that I wasn't the victim, that the victim was standing on the other side of the courtroom and I was the perpetrator. And I turned to my lawyer, who hated me at this point, and I said, plead me, I'm guilty. And he was probably disappointed that he probably thought I was good for another $20,000, but he pleaded me guilty. And then the judge, and I kid you not, reached under the desk at my sentencing hearing. It was about a week later, 2 weeks later in Cape May County Courthouse. The judge reached under the desk and pulled out the big book, and he read me a page. And that would be really nice and poignant, except my thoughts were, oh, great, he's one of those freaking recovery idiots. He's going to cut me a break. I'll go to rehab. I'll go to a meeting, whatever, get me out of this. And then he gave me like a really, really big sentence. I had to go to jail, and then I had to do day reporting. And yeah, it was like, it was starting to get to the end. I wanted to kill myself. My wife was leaving me with my 2 kids. My house was, I couldn't pay the mortgage. Everything was just fucking horrible. And I tried to kill myself half-heartedly, but I was in a state. And then my brother-in-law, here's the recovery part of my story, which I is better. My brother-in-law, who was really didn't like me very much at the time, but we're very close now. I love him. He's a psychotherapist, a psychologist who works in addiction in New York, New Jersey, and he was telling my sister, who I really loved, that I was going to die, and there was nothing that anybody could do about it. And my nephew Jesse heard that and got really upset and said something to the effect of, I get emotional saying this. He said something to the effect of, Dad, I love Uncle George and you help other people. Why can't you help Uncle George? So I was like, to Dennis, my brother-in-law, with a great deal of anger, he tells me now, sent me to this place, Alina Lodge. It was my first rehab. And most of the people there had been to 20 rehabs. It was like, this is like, Alina is the final resting place for hopeless alcoholics. And the beauty of it is you're there until the staff have decided that you've had a spiritual change sufficient to recover. They price it low, so anybody, you can be there for a long time. They don't take insurance because they don't want anybody telling them what the length of stay is. And you don't know you're going to leave until the day before they tell you. And it's a fucking boring place. Pardon my language. It's intentionally boring to get all your behaviors out. And I could tell stories about that place another time, but it's really, I understand why either Chris or Dave left, because a lot of people did. I didn't. I'm really glad I didn't dodge the lodge. I was there for 11 months. I got it there. I had a spiritual awakening there. And I guess I have time to describe that, but it's not an unusual one. I had lost everything. I was ashamed. I was bankrupt. I was embarrassed. I was still on probation. I was in my room, this little horrible little room, and my roommate was, I'll say this, I don't mean to be shocking, but this is what it's like when you're institutionalized. My roommate was pleasuring himself on the other side of the room, and I'm in desperation, freaking out because I'm never going to see my kids again. And I hit my knees, which I never did. I was an avowed atheist, and but it doesn't matter. I don't talk about that. But I have a higher power now. It's not a deity, but it's different. I didn't have one then, and but I thought for some reason I hit my knees, and and I was like, help me, help me, help me. And then this sense came over me that I'll never forget, and I try to remember every day, that this calm came, and it was like, it's going to be all right. You don't know how. You'll see your family again. You'll see your kids again. I wasn't so bothered about my wife, but I'll see my kids again. And I don't know how, and I don't know when. It doesn't matter. I still have the capacity to love. And if I can still feel love, I'm not insane, and there's hope, And I felt that. It really struck me, and my life turned around at that point. I was nowhere near done with the lodge, but I began to take it seriously and stop fucking around. And I can say that, except for the time I relapsed, that peace has never really left me. It never really left me. And sometimes it's further away than other times, but it comes back. So I was there for 11 months. They told me I couldn't go back to, well, I couldn't go back to England. Well, my wife had moved to England, and we had already had a house here, although we lived in America. But I couldn't go back because I was on probation, and the British government wasn't going to allow me to emigrate. And also, I was told not to. So for the first time in my life, I was taking direction, And so I was told not to go back, and I didn't. And I went to Washington to a sober house. And the very only thing I learned in rehab was the very next day, I went to a meeting of AA in Georgetown, and I took up a service commitment, and I met people. And slowly I began to feel like useful again. And the peace was still kind of there, but it was tough. But I was there, and I made friends, like honestly made friends. Like I wasn't pretending to be somebody else. I got a sponsor named Alvin. He had been on the streets of DC as a junkie for 30 years, and he didn't take any bullshit. He was a great, gentle, humane, beautiful man. 3,000 people in Washington went to his funeral when he died. And I think about him a lot too. For a guy who was a street junkie, 3,000 people in DC attended his funeral. Anyway, I was allowed finally to emigrate back to the UK. I did that. I had no career. My marriage was a shambles, and it wasn't going to survive I knew then, I was told by the people in rehab that it wouldn't survive sobriety. And that's sad. But the saddest thing was that I moved back to be with my kids, because even through the worst of things, in truth, I loved alcohol and drugs more than my children, because I chose it all the time. But my love for my children was really deep, and we were close, and we're now still so close, and that's a gift, And I have two more children now, which I remarried about 10 years ago, and it's just different, it's just, so what's it like now? I did relapse during the beginning of the pandemic. And the reason I relapsed was I stopped going to meetings, and I stopped talking to addicts and alcoholics, and I avoided people consciously. I was just pissed off at somebody, and that's what I did. And I didn't drink right away, and I didn't drug right away, but pretty soon it was inevitable. I did. And my family, my new family, my two stepchildren who are like my children, and my wife, my current wife, who had never seen me drunk, had never seen me high, knew about my past, and liked the fact that I was in sobriety. They saw what it was like. They got like this awakening to like what it is. It's not funny war stories, and it's not, George is funny and charming drunk. It's like, this guy's a fucking raving alcoholic, because the disease is progressive even when I'm not drinking. And I know that. I'm not going to go into recovery speak, because I know this is a different type of meeting, but this is my truth. I was flat on my ass, and my stepdaughter found me, and she found the meeting that I do service in now. She found it for me. She was absolutely terrified. And I ran back to the program. I ran back like running, and I haven't left since, and I don't intend to. Because if I do, I'll die. I know, but worse than dying is I'll fuck up everybody else's life. So I don't know, Dave, Mike, rather. How much time do I have?
Much as you want. You can bring the
Oh, really?
recovery if you
Well, I'm
want for a
almost done.
little while. Yeah.
I'm almost done. I also want to talk about recovery. Service in Washington saved my life, because when I went to the West Side Club in DC after rehab, I took a 7 a.m. coffee commitment, and I'm a people pleaser, and sometimes it's good to take advantage of your character defects to put them to good use. So I was there at 7 a.m. every day making coffee for like seriously high functioning and low functioning people. But I had an obligation. I felt useful again for the first time in my life. I had nothing. I had no money. I had a bicycle. I had a job that was kind of like a recovery job, but I loved it. I managed a pit barbecue place called Rockland's up in Upper Georgetown. I love barbecue. And anyway, and I got it. I got recovery. And I remember getting a phone call from the judge's clerk who had sentenced me, and somehow he had heard about that I was doing all right, and he expunged my record and let me off probation early, so I could get back to the UK and be with my kids who needed me. And I did. I came back in 2005, I guess, or four, right at the end of four. And I haven't left since. My marriage, like I said, didn't survive it, but that happens. It's not about whose fault it was or anything like that. It was just my side of it was that I made the marriage sick from the very first time we dated, which when I was in a blackout drunk. But my kids needed me, and I needed them. And I remember one of the things I'll say is that when I was in Alina Lodge, I felt sorry for myself at the beginning, and I was like always going on about my kids. And then one day, another moment of clarity, it occurred to me that my kids were fine. They didn't need me. They didn't need their fuck up dad. They needed to be away from me and have a life that wasn't full of chaos and disappointment. And when the time was right, I'd be able to be back with them. So I'm glad to say that I am back with them. They don't live with me; they're all grown up, but they live nearby, and we talk all the time, and we're really close. All four of my kids and my wife. I have a life beyond anything. I got sober to make my consequences go away, I guess. I had no idea of having a spiritual program, what it meant, what connectedness means, or what present minded. I had none of that. If you had told me about that, I'd have thought you were nuts. And what I have now is a life beyond anything I could ever imagine. I have a home, I have a family, I have a job that I love that has nothing to do with what I used to do because I couldn't do that kind of work sober, working in finance, and I didn't ever want to. And for a long time, the FINRA, the regulators wouldn't have allowed me to anyway, even if I wanted to. So my job lets me be of service in a different way. I work in social housing. I'm a community activist, and I do service in this great 24/7 international English speaking meeting, which a couple of my friends are here with me tonight from, and I love it. I love my life. I'm going to cry in a minute, really. I truly will, because, well, I'll close by saying this, right? And I say this in meetings too, that I'm a guy who grew up taking every pill that there is in the world. I would put pills in my mouth. I didn't know what they were, man. I took birth control pills. I took dog vitamins. It didn't matter. I would take anything. I was a garbage head. If somebody came up to me today and said, "Here's a pill, it will make you not alcoholic," I would turn it down. It would make you not an addict. I would say no, because I was born without a rule book, without a playbook, really. And I had no clue how to live my life. And now, because of recovery, I do. And because of the friends I've made. And I used to think, I've heard this from somebody else, like everything. I heard this. I heard somebody once say that the greatest gift they got in recovery was the ability to be present in the lives of other people and to allow other people to be present in their life. And when I heard that, I ran cold. My hair stood up in my arms, and I was like, that's what I want. That's what I've always wanted. And I could never have. And now I have that. So the reason I talked to you so much before doing this, Mike, is that I don't want anything to ever jeopardize my recovery. And it's kind of nice to be able to tell these stories, but the best part of the story is where it is now. And I'll just leave it at that because I don't have much else to say. To me, it occurs to me that gratitude is like the highest form of love. And when I get that wave of gratitude, that makes me kind of cry. It makes my hand, my arms, the hair of my arms stand up. That's when I'm in closest contact with a higher power of my understanding, which is just love and the connection between people that we form. And that runs through all of us. That to me is a power so much greater than anything I am. And I embrace it as much as I can. And when I don't embrace it, I know where to find it. So thank you. I'm really glad that I did this. I was really doubtful about it, but it's in our meeting. We talked for 5 minutes max. So I guess I had this building up in me. Never get to talk. My family doesn't want to hear it anymore. So yeah, thank you, man. Thanks very much. I'll just stop here, I guess.